Well, hello, friends and neighbors. John, your whiskey neighbor here, but it is a special night because tonight I've got with me John Cote from Black Fox Farm and Distillery. John, welcome to the channel.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
I am really excited. Obviously, it's great to talk to people like yourself actually making whiskey, and I know that you also have a passion for sustainable farming, raising your own grain. Sorry, sowing, harvesting, reaping your own grain, and ensuring that that is done with care for the land and craftsmanship. So, before we get talking about the whiskey, I'd like to share, and I'll welcome Michael and Ron. Thank you for coming. But I'd like to hear a little bit about just the early like how did you end up going from I think a very well established, I only know that through your website, approach to agriculture into talk. You can talk a bit about that as much as you want, and then what made you think I should probably be distilling this excellent spirit?
Well, this usually takes about a 2-hour presentation in order to do it, but I'll trim it down a little bit. So, agriculture is our background. So, when I say our background, I mean myself and my wife because we do this together. She's the CEO of the company, and I do the operations part. Anyway, so to try and summarize, we met each other in university. We go typical Saskatchewan story, go back grain farming with my parents. My parents were kind of ahead of their time in that they had wanted to retire early and all this kind of stuff. So we ended up farming together for about a year, and they decided, no, that was kind of fun, but why don't you just buy the farm and then you can make all the decisions on your own, which was kind of fun. But the bad part about making all the decisions is you get to make all the decisions and live with them. But things progressed really well. So we had some very good luck in farming. We were named the Outstanding Young Farmers of Canada. My wife was awarded a Nuffield Farming Scholarship out of the UK, had the opportunity to travel to 15 different countries and study agriculture. Later on in life, I was actually awarded the same scholarship. We were actually the only couple in the world that have ever been awarded this particular scholarship, which is very interesting because then we play off of each other's ideas and what's happening. So anyway, so that led us to a point in time in our lives where we had kind of our children were little and we always wanted to travel with them. So we said, well, time to rent out the farm. We moved to South America. At that time, all my friends thought I was underemployed and underutilized. So I took on a contract in teaching farmers how to grow canola in Kazakhstan for 2 years.
Wow.
Anyway, so we moved back to Canada, and I had realized that by that point in our careers, we had studied or taught or farmed on every continent except Antarctica and Africa,
Wow.
and came back to the Saskatchewan prairies and realizing we're doing something really special, but our business model, which at the time was farming extensively, probably wasn't going to work for multi generations because small town Saskatchewan, we have, schools are getting smaller, probably eventually shut down. We have, hospital was an hour away, all this kind of stuff. So where do you find staff? All these problems. So sold that farm, bought this one, and the concept was, can we create something using our knowledge in farming that is really extraordinary? And we could have, made pasta. We could have done a lot of things. We could have grown vegetables, but whiskey was the vehicle of choice in order to tell our ag story. So I don't know if you understand, but where we farm here is a really special place on the planet, and we grow extremely high quality grains. And especially if you do really good agronomic practices, you can actually intensify the flavors and make things even more special. So then that became the desire, and we just went for it and said, "Here, let's spend all of our money and make whiskey."
Nice quick tack on in the end. Actually, I can see a little past you some of the equipment, and I've seen the beautiful drone work around your distillery shop. I
Yeah.
assume, and I understand there's a ton of investment, and then you also have to make this beautiful liquid and let it rest before there is any return on that investment as well. but I really am connecting to, thank you for sharing a bit of the deep background that you have in approaches to farming and your world experience, and then come back to a unique place where you can make flavorful grain. When you were talking about terroir, I almost put a bottle of Waterford here. I don't know if you know that much about the Waterford group and the terroir that they're really trying to highlight with Irish whiskey, and I've got several of them. And from my point of view, they're trying to say, no, it matters so much, this field, this location, you're going to taste that in the final product. Do you feel some of that is coming through in your whiskey, the actual terroir, the very local uh, climate and soil as you describe? Am I going to be able to taste that when you get into your whiskey?
Absolutely. I don't know if you'll be able to say, "Oh, that came from John's place," but you'll notice the uniqueness of it, and that's key in this business. So, we could start a distillery and try make what somebody else is making. And we always looked at the craft industry when we started, and everybody was trying to do, malted whiskey. Here, we want to make another malt. We want to make a single malt. We want to do that. We said, no, that doesn't really work for us. We want to be Canadian. So that meant let's grow grains that we're actually growing. So we're not going to use corn. We're not going to use some of these other things. And
Nice.
we're actually going to dig deep and see, okay, what works really well for us farming. That's what we're going to grow, and that's what we're going to make whiskey out of.
Okay, well, let's pause on this journey and talk a bit about the whiskeys that I have in front of me, because you talk about grains you can grow, and this one's pretty easy for me. It's a single grain rye. I'm fairly familiar with rye, and Canadians, I think, are quite proud of the rye that they grow. And then this one, I always pronounce it, I think it's triticale. Is that, can you correct me on how I say triticale? Is that
Yeah,
what this grain?
triticale is absolutely perfect. And
Okay.
then you'll notice on the label there should be the Latin for it, which is triticale.
Yes.
So what they did, they just took the Latin for wheat and the Latin for rye, and they squished them together because triticale is a hybrid between wheat and rye.
And why don't you? Okay, so I've heard it's a hybrid wheat and rye. Is it popular in the prairies? Is it popular in your area, or did you choose to bring it in because you knew it would grow well in those soils?
We, no, it's not popular, and this is the kicker. Triticale is probably one of the most famous crops in the world because it's got such an amazing history. So anyway, so it goes through, and then all of a sudden, nobody's really growing it because really it tastes too much like rye. The plant breeders over years had tried to take the rye flavor out of it, but they couldn't. But there was a group of plant breeders at one time that were quite interested in making whiskey, and they would make notes in their little notebooks saying, "Here, this one, we kind of took it home. We made a mash out of it. This seems to work pretty good in that marketplace." But they kind of forgot to tell the farmer. Now, when you forget to tell the farmer that there's a potential market for something out there, nobody's going to pick it up. So basically, nobody has ever adopted using triticale instead of rye, even though, in my opinion, it's a far superior grain for distilling.
Well, but in some circles, I want to preface. Of course, I haven't opened your bottles yet, and I can't wait. But I know Revelstoke. Oh, the name just slipped out of my mind. But they put out a triticale whiskey. That was probably my first triticale that I've had.
Yeah,
So there are a couple of people in Canada that are saying, "Hey, this is one of our grains, or it grows well, and let's give it a go." Right?
yeah, no, absolutely. And the more popular it becomes, the happier I am because right now you have to teach everybody not only how to say it, but what to expect from it. Because the
Okay.
problem is when we go out and we're selling whiskey, everybody understands a rye whiskey. Everybody understands a malt whiskey, a corn whiskey, all this kind of thing. And all of a sudden you start using a different kind of grain, it takes some pretty heavy lifting on the education side.
For sure. Well, I'm anxious to open this up, and I'm going to start with the triticale. It is a 48.1%. Now, I don't know if those are good cork pops on those vent locks, but I gave it a try. How did you end up with? Talk to me a little bit about. We've talked grain. I really respect that, and certainly your ag background. But as you fully understand far more than me, distilling is also a craft. So do you distill it a couple of times, go through like how does your distilling work? Do you use unique fermentation? Is it a long fermentation? I like to geek out in whiskey, so talk to me a bit about how this came to be.
So the top that you just flipped over there, if you go on the top of the top, there's a coin, and the coin has a serial number, and you can search all the information that you're looking for on the website. It won't tell you a lot of things, but there is. So what we do is we're doing grains in distilling. So basically, we're making a grist and taking that through the entire process. So for the people watching that don't understand, like if you're making a malt whiskey, typically you'd make a wort, which is like a beer, put that into the still without the grain in it. We really wanted to concentrate. We wanted to get a really heavy grain flavor into it. So the best way to do that is to take the grain right through the complete process. So we do a short fermentation from there. We kind of mix up the yeast a little bit, and that's something that in farming is kind of in new and old. But a lot of times, when you're growing a crop, especially when you look working with grasses, you grow a whole bunch of different kinds. So that same concept works with yeast, that we can use a whole bunch of different kinds of yeast and create both flavors and have really good economic returns out of it.
Excellent. I'm just going to show now that I went and chased the Vintlock topper, and if I can show, I don't know how good my camera will be on this. No, it's focus locked, but there's a coin, not just like I thought it was an image of a coin, but you've actually put a coin in the top there. And in the back, you mentioned there's a serial number or something like that.
Yeah.
That
And then
I
you can search
put into
that on
your
the
website or something and find all the goodness behind this.
Yeah. And because there's a whole bunch of different things that make it unique. One, the terroir, like the one where we grew the stuff. And then when we get through stilling, uh, our aging process is quite unique and kind of by mistake. All the whiskey's aged outdoors.
Oh, I
And
saw that
when
on
we,
your website. Again, you have beautiful imagery. Whoever's doing your image work, hats off, because I saw the barrels, in the heat of the summer, or the maybe it was more like a sundown. There's some kind of sun on them, and then the snow coming on them. I'm like, wow! Like I just want to go there and look at your barrels. They look fantastic.
it is absolutely amazing. So we had started just because we didn't have enough money to build a building. And so we started that way, and as you're getting into it, so I would like everybody who's ever watches this to use their imagination, that you've taken every dollar you've ever earned and then go to the bank and borrow everything you can, and you make whiskey. And you don't really know how to make whiskey, but you got a pretty good idea. You're kind of a sciencey kind of a character, but eventually you start getting a little bit of, heartburn and not sleeping good at night because the money started adding up in the pile outside, not realizing that you're actually doing something quite wrong, which is just you're putting it outside. And so when we started doing, sending it away to, experts and saying, okay, here we need make sure we're doing this properly, they were coming back to us and saying, gee, it seems odd, but it seems to be aging quicker than what it should be. Because like a 2-year-old whiskey, all of a sudden it didn't have those really harsh high notes in it and all that kind of stuff. So we ended up kind of figuring out that it's actually being outside and those wild temperature fluctuations kind of, not sure if it accelerates the aging, but it definitely changes the aging process for the whiskey, because you're actually creating a vacuum on the barrels several times during the year, and it's physically sucking the whiskey back out of the wood, and then it pressures up the next day and pushes the whiskey back in.
Awesome.
So we're having terrific results. Anyway, so there's piles of information around that you can grab off the website for each bottle, because each barrel is bottled separately. So every barrel is unique. And so every time you might go and buy another bottle of Triticale whiskey, it will have its own nuanced character as well.
Awesome.
Anyway, I'm holding you up from drinking.
Well, it's already filling the room with its nice natural aroma, so I'm certainly enjoying that. I love that I can seek out more information based on what you've said here. This particular bottle. So are these bottles though? I know we're keeping it, but I maybe we should sip and then I should ask these questions because people are like, well, how does it taste? But is it a single cask? Like what I mean is this number on here, does it bring me back to this particular cask and those kinds of things?
Yeah, exactly. So each cask, and that's why it's bottled at 48.1. So each cask, when we disgorge it,
Yes.
we do a series of dilutions on it, and we actually bottle it about 0.2% higher than what we think it should be. Because I would say 90% of the people are going to add a little bit of water into it, and
Yes.
we want to bring it down to where we think it is absolutely perfect. So this one, in our taste testing for that day, we probably would have said, oh, 47.9, 47.8 is where its happy place is. So we'll bottle a little bit higher because most people will put in a little bit of water into it.
Well, let's go in on the nose a bit. Do you have a bit of your
I
triticale?
do.
It may not be this cask, but you've got a little bit going on.
I do.
Okay, now you've told me very clearly it's not a rye, but there are some rye spicing notes for me very quickly on the nose. Welcome. I really appreciate that kind of spicing, but I am getting almost a rich fruit with a little bit of that spicing on the edge. What else should I be looking for in this cask?
So it's quite interesting. So the morphology of the triticale grain is quite a bit different than rye. So it's picked up some of the traits of the wheat. So if you think of where your flavor is going to come from when you're distilling or making beer, it's that outer layer just underneath the bran where all the polyphenols are. So
Okay.
those are the components that the yeast are going to work with in order to make more flavors, and they kind of carry through the process. So in this, you're going to find those rye flavors as well, but you're probably going to pick up some of the cherry notes that you would find in a wheat whiskey.
I'm very much connecting right now, just in the nose. But to when you said cherry, I'm like, this is a richer dark fruit, like a cherry for me,
Yeah,
which is always present in rye for sure.
yeah, and yeah, because with rye, you're looking at more citrus and lighter, like kind of blast out of your glass. And this one, it's quite interesting. So one of our main markets is actually into the UK, and so many people in the UK compare it to a lowland Scotch. And I say, well, how can it be similar to a lowland Scotch? It's not malt. But they said just the way that it plays off the nose, that it's got that nice, it's that really deep, mellow kind of a feel to it.
I can say maybe some of that roundness is connecting with Scotch, but my nose is also leading me a little more into some of that spiciness and that richer fruit that could almost take me into a very fruit forward, dark aged bourbon more than Scotch. This type of fruit for me, a lot of Scotches take me into cut orchard and apples and pears and those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
And this is for me more of a red fruit.
yeah.
And oh, I should say this casking, ex bourbon, new oak. What are some of the casks here?
All brand new oak.
Uh,
So we've been buying all of our oak in from the United States here since we started. But last year, 18 months ago, we started buying our own wood in from Ontario. And we're setting up with another friend of ours. We'll start making our own barrels here,
oh,
hopefully
that's
by the end of this.
that's phenomenal. Look, I'd really like to taste this. It smells rich and welcoming. So cheers.
And to you. So the biggest difference I find with the triticale versus any other grain is actually the mouthfeel. So it's almost bordering on a bourbon, like it just seems to coat your mouth, gives you that almost like a very kind of a dairy kind of a feeling in your mouth, and I think it's absolutely wonderful.
It is, and it's just first thoughts. We opened it together. Right now, the palate for me, I did really enjoy. It's not quite chewy, but it was full, and I really like that in a whiskey. I like a whiskey that sort of has a bit of character, a bit of body, and I'm finding that in this expression. So thank you for that. Um, The fruit though did back off a little bit in the palate. Like maybe it's going to come as my second sip, because then my olfactory and everything's going to work together. But it was richer on the nose than in that first sip.
Yeah. And a little bit of that is, higher proof spirits, always, like you were saying, like, your palate will come back to it. You've got a bunch of nerves that are saying, oh, gee, that's more than what we're used to. But you'll find, or I find, and you have to remember, I come from an ag background, not a whiskey background. Like, I love whiskey, but it's, it seems that it grows, and I think that happens with any whiskey. You could be drinking anything, but the second sip is so important. The third sip, and it just keeps changing, and then that's usually when I start playing around, adding a couple drops of water, seeing what that does to it.
Yeah.
And it's a nice. What I like about this is, so when we make gin, the trick of making good gin is to find a good balance. And I find with this, there's nothing really that's overpowering and saying, oh, that's just too much of that. I don't like it. And this is just, to me, it just, if I could describe it any way at all, I would call it very well balanced.
Uh, Certainly, and at 48, it's drinking really nicely. I imagine it's still on the bit of the young side, right? Because you're still a growing distillery.
Yeah.
But it's really, as you said, vacuum has been pulled in and out of that wood, so I'm not getting, any of that. Sometimes characteristic young and get. It needs to breathe more in the glass because some of those high alcohols
Yeah.
really just got to go away. It's already had that interaction, so it's drinking well. Um, a little bit on the finish or in the second sip, I am getting more of the oaks and more of the almost a bit of a pastry note, like a burnt, not burnt, a cooked pastry, like a body that gives some of a grain, but not a grainy note. I don't want to say things that, like, I don't want to keep saying what it's not.
You know, but it's funny because there is, to me, in the very center of it, like, I understand what you're saying with the creme brulee, but there is a grainy note to it that we're quite proud of. And I wouldn't call it so much grainy, but almost dusty. And it's kind of that drying sensation of saying, and so when we're traveling, so we'll go and I'll do a tasting, either in the UK or in Dubai or something. I'm trying to explain to them what it's like living here on the prairies. And I say, okay, so you get a September evening, and the farmers everywhere in the province are all harvesting at the same time. You cannot get away from the smell of grain dust. And if you don't perceive that in a bad way, to me, it's a very positive way because that was an essential part of my life experience. But it's almost that smell of those autumn evenings is kind of, if you can convert that into a flavor, it's kind of hiding there in the middle of that whiskey.
When you share a story like that and I can connect, I'm a prairie boy at heart. I actually kind of grew up in, well, not kind of, I grew up in Edmonton, so I'm a city boy, but my family are all out on farms, and so I can relate to that harvest time. And when you put it in that context in autumn and the way that harvest is coming across, what a great word picture.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your. I'm glad we started with triticale, and it is. Oh, in the long finish, I'm even getting just a little bit of impression of chocolate. I'm not saying this is like a chocolate malt or that kind of chocolatey, but there's a little bit of that just kicking around. I'd like to talk about this, if I may. You sent me these two beautiful, by the way. Just as I said, your film work is fantastic. Your farm looks wonderful. Your work on these bottles is great too, and I appreciate that these are smaller, the 500 mils. Because that makes sharing and filming and all that just a really delight to share. Oh, while I'm opening and trying not to lose my cap again, I can't find your whiskey in Alberta. And are you in Alberta? Because a lot of viewers that will come on and certainly catch the replay of this will want to know where can they get it. So I'm in Alberta. How can we order your whiskey?
So Calgary South is kind of where we've been focusing in Alberta. There are some stores in Edmonton. It's best if you go onto the website, there's a little section in there that has a little map and shows all the stores that carry us. But yes, Alberta is a growing. We've only been in the in the Alberta market for the last 2 years, and it's growing all the time.
So, but there are a couple of stores here. Can I just use Liquor Connect in Alberta and find out where you are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's good.
That's probably the easiest.
I really haven't seen you, and I'll say to the viewers tuning in, I first heard of your whiskey from, I think it was a whiskey club that maybe ordered or received some bottles from you in the UK, and I was watching the person review this, and the SE, that's Southeast 11, right? That relates to where you are in the world.
Yeah, that's our land description actually. Yeah, and so in Western Canada, for those that aren't aware, the all the area was surveyed and then divided into 1 mile squares. And so that would be your section. So that was section 11. We are on the southeast corner of section 11, township 36, range 6, west of the third meridian.
That's fantastic. And I saw a bottle similar to this. It wasn't. I don't think it was either of these ones, but and he was over in the UK and he was talking about it, and their club had talked about it, and it was one of their favorites. And that's what made me go, how do I not know? And I even drove through Saskatoon recently to drop my daughter off at a college in Winnipeg, and I stopped at several stores, and they're like, "No, we don't have any of that." I'm like, "How do we not have any of this whiskey? It's made it around the world."
So, well, it's a little bit behind our marketing. So in Saskatchewan, the only way a store gets it is if they buy a whole barrel. And so it's kind of in select stores, and that's kind of what we can want it, that it's not the kind of whiskey you sell at Joe's Corner Liquor Mart kind of a thing. And
Well,
nothing against Joe, but
no, sure.
it's it makes us, we're a real small team, and so we struggle sometimes that when we get into too many stores, then
Oh, I've lost you, but I don't know if I've lost you on my end or if you've timed out. I oh, are you back? Is it
I'm
me?
back. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I hope. I don't know. Anyways, I heard you saying that right now in Saskatoon, Saskatoon Co-op has it. Michael just said, so that's good. I did stop in a Sobeys liquor, and I can't remember what else. A couple of liquor stores as I went through Saskatoon, and I didn't see it, but I hope to see it on the shelf there. And I hope when you come to Alberta, I know you're in a few stores. Like Wine and Beyond is a big place, and if they can, they have a huge wall of local Canadian whiskeys, and it would
Yeah.
be awesome to see your releases there. Let's talk a bit about this rye. What should I know? Going in, as I said, is there a unique process? Is this 100% rye? Is it also new oak? Talk to me about the whiskey.
Yeah, so it's also New York oak, and is so in our process it's always 100% whatever we're doing. So basically, it kind of comes from the farming part of it. So if we're growing triticale, that's what's in the granary, that's what's going to go in. So there's not, I'm going out and getting a 1,000 pounds of something else to add on top. But because if we look at the traditions in Canadian whiskey, they were always set up that that's the way they'd be distilling. And so they'd be making rye whiskey, and then they'd be making wheat whiskey, and they'd be making something else because that's what the flour mill was producing. So we kind of wanted to follow in that tradition. So if we do make a blend, and we do a very exclusive blend of our best barrels. Everything's blended after it's been aged out, not before when it goes into the mash tank.
Okay, so you do a high level blend, but this is still a single cask.
This is still so exactly the same concept. So we've got a single cask of rye whiskey, and it's actually, so there's a little bit of a backstory behind rye whiskey at distillery. So rye whiskey only happens when we have a complete crop failure. So typically we're growing enough grain that we keep the distillery going. But that particular rye that you had came from a cousin of mine that farms north of here, about 200 kilometers. And he was growing it for seed. And when we went to harvest about I would say 2 days before we were planning to get into that field, we had about 6 inches of snow, and we lost the whole crop. So there we're sitting, had enough grain to get us through to about Christmas time. So we ended up having to go to him and say, here, can you get us some rye? So there is the odd time where we'll end up making rye. If we're doing other grains, especially like into those really interesting flavors. So oats, we make a lot of oat whiskey actually.
Oh,
Most of that's
okay.
used in building a blend or really special clients that will want an oat whiskey. Oats are like if everybody, anybody,
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I've never had a problem with my connection, but if it's my end, I deeply apologize. I've lost you again.
oh.
Um,
So that's the fun part of living on the farm because internet service sometimes isn't all the best.
fair enough.
Anyway, so
Let
I opened up this particular barrel of whiskey.
Yeah.
I was out in the barrels and we were kind of, we go through them, we kind of take inventory and I opened this barrel and I was just absolutely astounded by the nose on it. When I opened up, like, so you're out in the middle, like you're outside, so you're not in a room or anything, but the nose on it I thought was just absolutely incredible. So we kept it there for a couple more years, and now we're just starting to harvest our rye whiskeys.
Well, it is wonderful, but it is brighter than the triticale in terms of like, you talked about a roundness, and I think I maybe said too much about the red cherry, but like there's a fruity. This one is that bright rye. It does that has like rye draws me in. It kind of almost like it excites me. It's got this like this is going to come. There's some interesting activity that's about to come. What are some notes that you would get on this rye just on the nose? How would you describe it?
Well, I would go like to me, what really comes across, like there is that rye spice. So you're getting cloves and all that kind of stuff. So the interesting thing about what we call rye spice or baking spice is some of the science behind that. So those same chemical compounds are found in a whole bunch of different things that we eat day to day. So people kind of describe them a little bit different. So I would get strawberries
Ooh.
off of it, and maybe a little bit of basil, like and it's all like if you take that whole idea of what cloves and nutmeg all smell like, they kind of translate into a whole bunch of different descriptors. So I would say I definitely agree with you. I get like strawberry, citrus, like those kind of things. I get the definite cloves and cinnamon, but I would put it more. I'm trying to think of like marzipan kind of a note off it right off the beginning.
I'm fully with you in the brightness. You even said citrus. There's not a ton of citrus, but there's that brightness. Maybe I'm trying to go after clove, cinnamon. Absolutely. Strawberry has me interested to see if I get that. And maybe after a sip, maybe after I'm getting more of that. Because right now I'm not. I wouldn't say strawberry, but it might come.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing when you start talking with different people and tasting the same whiskey over and over again with different people. It's the the idea of how many flavors are imprinted on your brain from your life experience. And that's why we all like different whiskey, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to pick up a bottle of Jameson's and really enjoy it. And the next guy beside me is going, how can you drink that? It's plonk. And I can say, no, but I like it. And you shouldn't really you can't say that you can't like it because for them, it's really good, right? There are whiskeys out there that are bad. Like, don't get me wrong. And everybody's going to say they're bad because they've been like the work of distilling them hasn't been done. And somebody was trying to make too much money. They weren't doing their cuts properly,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
I
But when you get
totally agree.
into the
Like,
world,
I get here every week and I'm talking about whiskey, and I try very much to tell people like, really, you should tune in a couple times to get to know what John likes, and then you can say, oh, maybe I'll like that or maybe I won't, right? Because my experience
absolutely,
of whiskey is very different than everyone else's.
yeah, no, that is the absolute truth. And that's something like for the people that are watching, it depends on where you are in that journey of, of whiskey. Like to me, so whiskey is really about really enjoying flavors. So we're not drinking vodka anymore. We're drinking something that can be really complex. And to me, the best training is in your eating habits. Like when you're eating breakfast, actually slow down, figure out what shreddies taste like. Now add a little bit of sugar. See what sweetened shreddies taste like. But that's the steps you have to go through with whiskey too. So it's and your taste will change. So you'll be kind of into your whiskey journey, and all of a sudden you'll be really enamored with peaty whiskeys. And you'll spend 2 years exploring everything that's got a little bit of peat in it. And then the
Totally.
same
I
thing happens.
totally, I totally agree. But I think I poured this like 10 minutes ago. So let's talk. Let's try to taste this rye a little bit together here. Cheers
That's
to
a
your health.
lovely idea. Cheers.
Now this one, has that wonderful rye, a little bit of cracked pepper, a little bit of baking spice, a lot of baking spices you mentioned. But I had to check the proof because at first, aside from spicing, because that really is perky and says hello, it tasted almost like I thought, was it like 43% actually at first. Now it's come back a little bit as I've talking. Now it's a little bit more present. But it's interesting that my immediate impression was a little less alcohol than the triticale, which isn't where I went. Like when you saw me compare it, nosing a little bit
Yeah.
back and forth, and when I was comparing, the triticale was so soft and round and wonderful and delicious, and this was bright and a little citrus and spicy, and I expected the palate to be that. And now I've talked myself in a circle, but I was surprised that it didn't kind of wonk me over the head. It is still well put together, very well put together.
No, and it's nice, and it's got when you think about whiskeys, if you look at them as like as a chemist would, I like to think that both of those whiskeys are really well structured. So if you start adding water into them or using them, some people love to make an old fashioned or something. That flavor is really holds together well, and you can some whiskeys just you can't do that with, and it's more about the amount of oil in them and everything. So we filter a little bit. It's not that I didn't know what I was doing, but maybe I didn't know what I was doing. It turned out good though. So we filter right out of the cask, and then that's the only filtering that it gets. So then when we dilute it, some of the all we get basically it doesn't take any of the oils out. And so you'll find in the bottle, you'll notice some of the bottles, you'll almost see it starting to precipitate out. So it's there's quite a bit of flavor in there, and that those oil globules are what retains all the aromatics. So when you start playing around with it, that all starts to change, and you can start getting some of those really nice high notes coming out, which is I think absolutely lovely,
Absolutely.
especially if you're making a cocktail.
And I would do a disservice for anyone coming in. Oh, cheers, East Coast! Welcome aboard. Haven't seen you here before. Um, by me, I reacted a little bit oddly and quickly, and I shouldn't. This really is, as you described. There's good oils in here, so it's still you talk about being well structured, well put together. Would hold up in cocktail, but it holds up in the sip as well. And if I may, to the viewers that have seen me taste a lot of rye, this I would say is really nice, presenting with that nice backbone of spice, nice oaks. Actually, I'm really liking a bit of the oak here, and it's not running into a grassy rye like depending on like a lot of American ryes for sure can really run into like those 95.5s out of MGP. They're very grassy.
Yeah.
I'm not getting that here. I did have more dark fruit on your triticale than I am in this moment, so it's not quite like Dr. Don really likes his like the dark oak. Talks about the cherries that he can pull out of that because of his cuts in the way he does his second distilling through the pot distilling. But this is, I would say, full and rich, and you get notes of that citrus, but it doesn't run away into hay and grass and menthol or mint. That's not what I'm getting. Instead, it stays really structured well as you described.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of what we do around here.
Yeah. Sorry, did I say too much? No, I was. That was
No, it's so interesting hearing you talk about the whiskey because I'm not a rye buff.
Oh, okay.
So ryes are kind of, and I think it's more because my experience has been more with American ryes, and like because you're walking through distilleries and you're trying to figure out what they're doing and stuff, and
Sure.
I can find them quite off-putting. at
Yeah.
times. And yet I do, this one's found a very special spot in my heart.
Awesome. And that's really what I was trying to say, that I'm not getting any of the wild dill pickle or the extreme menthol or any of the
Yeah,
stuff that I think people react to in rye when they just pick up a rye bottle and it's got those notes. Yeah.
yeah. And I think a little bit that probably comes from just the distillation style. So when we distill, we're only distilling it once,
Okay.
and it goes to the column, and we use like 2 plates in the column. So it's very lightly distilled. And then what we do is we take these huge cuts, and we're just left with, so of all the product that we make during the day, only 50% of it is good enough quality for the whiskey. The other 50% gets shunted off into our gin stream. So then that's our base that we make our neutral spirit out of. And so it never re-enters the still. It doesn't go anywhere. So you get a really, really nice clean spirit that way.
Okay, so you're not taking your tails and redoing it and trying to get a little more out of that. Like you basically, your heart cut is it, and the rest you do in other products.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is, again, like when you look at the physical characteristics of a small distillery, and we've kind of put the micro in micro. So we've got 1,000 liters still. It's not very big. To do some of those things like recycling tails, you need a pretty big distillery in order to make those mechanics work, because you need settling tanks and you need places to hold everything. And for a small distillery, really, it's pretty much impossible to do that and do a good job of it.
Well, this is we said hello for the first time today, and I just opened the bottles here, but I have tasted a fair amount of whiskey, and I would like to say, John, it's come across the quality. We started talking about your farm and your care for sustainable farming, and your understanding of your terroir, your climate, your soils, choosing grains that grow flavorfully in your area, and all the way through. I don't think you're giving yourself near enough credit in terms of your distilling work, and even the understanding of that outside aging that creates that vacuum that's just going to push it into the oak further. I would say through our conversation and now tasting a bit of your hard work, this is fantastic. And I look forward to tasting more and hearing more about your journey as more and more Canadians, and you're already international. As I said, the first people that I saw taste your liquid was over in UK. So whatever you're doing well outside there. I just want to get into the local whiskey clubs too. I think it needs to be on our plates.
Yeah, no, and you'll see more of us. We plan on being here for the next very, very long time. We honestly want to make, like, so if you're going to have a big audacious dream, the goal is to make the best whiskey in the world. And realistically, in this part of the world, we have every opportunity. We've got the best grain, we've got smart people, we've got good resources. So there's nothing holding us back. It might take us, because everybody's perception of what's best, it might take a while to convince everybody that it's best. But we plan on being here forever. And so there should be ample opportunity for you to stop in and visit, or to pick up a bottle somewhere and enjoy it with your friends.
That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that we can drop in, show up. You have a tasting room or
Yeah, we're open 12 months out of the year, 5 days a week.
Hey, that's fantastic, John. And thank you for those that tuned in now, and also for those that'll catch it on the replay. And I appreciated that the people that did drop in said, "Oh no, it's here in Calgary. It's online at various places." So I'm glad that it is available. I don't know why I haven't seen it, so I will keep an eye out to be able to pick up maybe another expression. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, John, for joining me tonight.
And thank you, John, for the invitation.
Fantastic. Okay. And to those at home, I hope you have some excellent Canadian whiskey in your glass, and even better, some here from, do you say SE11 or Southeast 11 when people say the name of your whiskey?
We say SE11.
Okay.
And except when we're in London, because SE11 is a really bad postal district. So then we say the Southeast of 11.
May you guys seek out and have some SE11 in your glass. Cheers to a good night.
Okay. Good night.